Make a gentle start. I think people are still joining the room, but a very warm welcome to everybody to afternoon tea. If we'd have been together, we would have had homemade scones, I'm sure, and lots of tea, but we hope you've brought with you at least a cup of tea. We've got ours, haven't we, Sally?
We have indeed.
To join you all. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Hilary Woodhead. I'm the Executive Director of NAPA. And over the last year, we have been focusing on the importance of conversation and connection. And today is our first national day, which we've called Tea Tuesday. And what we've wanted to do really is to have a day where we really encourage everybody just to take a minute and to reflect and to connect with as many people that matter to them as possible. So I was thinking about all the people that I've met over my career that have made a huge difference to the way that I work and whose conversation and connection has influenced and inspired me over the years. So who better to have afternoon tea with than my dear friend Sally Knocker. So we're going to spend the next half hour, 45 minutes just chatting really over a cup of tea about conversation, having a conversation about conversation and about connection too. And why this topic is so important to both of us, but also just so important now, especially with the challenges that we've all experienced in recent months. So Sally, will you just tell us a little bit about yourself and about why this important topic is of such importance to you, please?
Yes, hello everybody, thank you for having me. And as you say, Hill, it's lovely to have this connection with an old friend as well as our professional and personal worlds coming together. I think for me, it's always been a topic that's important because I love to chat myself. So everybody knows that I'll be the first person to talk to someone at the bus stop or on a train or whatever. And I'm not very English in that sense. I always think that sometimes British people are a bit seen as a bit reserved, and I sometimes feel a bit more comfortable when I'm in Canada or Italy or places like that where it seems a bit more allowed to just chat. Yeah. But in terms of working in care, I remember particularly a piece of work that Richard Ward did back in 2000, and it was in the Journal of Dementia Care, and they examined 1,000 hours of video footage in some care homes in North London. Yeah, amazing level of detail. But what came out of that was 92% of the conversations in care homes, 92% were about the task. So it's time, come to lunch. Would you like a cup of tea? I'll take you to the other room now for an activity. And it really shocked me that so many conversations, I still see it today, are either around the task or around the weather. I mean, today we've got an excuse because
we're allowed to.
So there's nothing wrong with talking about the weather. But for me, if all our lives were just talking about the weather, how diminished our worlds would be. So I'm passionate about cutting the small talk and getting to the things that are really important to people. You know, what people mind about, the people, the places, the experiences that have shaped them. It's one of the reasons I work in older people's care, is that I love to hear stories. So when I'm working with care teams, with maintenance staff, with domestic staff, I always think this is one of the great parts of your jobs, if you get to meet and talk to people. But I think it needs curiosity, doesn't it, Hill? That people aren't always particularly curious about other people, whereas I'm naturally a bit nosy.
A chat and having a cup of tea was a luxury. Integral part
and activity coordinators particularly get that pressure that somehow if you haven't got more than 6 people, it isn't an activity, you know. I think we've changed that in recent years, but that somehow the one-to-one companionship on a sofa, you know, sitting in the garden, whatever, isn't seen as a real activity. And yet actually it's the lifeblood for many of us, isn't it, is the chat.
It's so important. And I think, you know, even just in the last few months, realizing how much time we do spend meeting up and meet for a coffee. As we were saying, we must meet for a coffee. It's nothing to do with the coffee. It's quite nice if the coffee's good, but actually what it's about is the chat, isn't it? It's about the company and getting together, and absolutely.
The drink is creating the connection, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we talked, Hilary and I were talking about the danger of sometimes the cup of tea being used in some care services as a sort of pacifier or kind of a reason not to talk, whereas actually it should be the opening.
Yeah.
You know, that
Yeah.
let's sit down and share it.
Absolutely. So that kind of takes me on really to just to think a bit more broadly about how integral kind of conversation and connection is to well-being, you know, because, you know, we talk so much about well-being now, don't we? And, you know, improving well-being, how do we enhance people's day? How do we make sure that, you know, the way they spend their day is as positive an experience as it could be? You know, how integral is conversation and connection to that, do you think?
I think it's absolutely vital in a sense, because it's actually saying I see you and you matter to me. And particularly if we give someone a compliment or ask an opinion, we're basically giving people literally the sense of being heard, being understood, given value. So it's quite a deep thing actually when someone, particularly when someone really listens to you. I always say that if someone says to you, "How are you?" but really wants to know the answer, there's often sometimes we just go, "How are you?" and you expect someone to say,
as you walking past.
And you don't really want to know the answer. I remember one home I worked in, people said, "Oh, Sally often makes people cry." I thought, God, I'm getting a good reputation here, but it's because I really wanted to know the answer about how people were.
Yeah, and really spend time with somebody. And I really liked what you said about asking people for their opinion. I think, you know, so many different care settings that I've worked in where they do that well, it makes such a difference to people's well-being, doesn't it? What you want to, that the contribution then that somebody is making, that it's not just about us initiating the conversation, us thinking of topics to discuss. It's actually saying, what do you think?
What, I mean, particularly in this current situation, you know, saying, well, we've got a crisis here. What do you think we could be doing about it? The people that we're working with will have been through crises of different kinds. The wisdom that we can gather collectively.
But and you also mentioned compliments, Sally.
Yeah.
Don't we all like well, some people, most of us like compliments. But yeah, why do you think compliments are so important?
I think, again, particularly as we age, we can feel quite invisible, I think, and there's something about someone noticing your jewelry or your hair, or that perks you up a little bit and says, "Oh, yes," and it adds to my sense of self-esteem and worth. But it does need to be genuine. I think that's one of the key things for me. If someone just gives you blanket compliments and it's not meant sincerely, I think sincerity is very...
But if it's really personal, if somebody's noticed something about you that maybe is a bit different, or something that you've tried, and they comment on that, or something that you're really good at, and you know that's your thing, that's the thing that, you know, an achievement in your life, or something that you've enjoyed and you've made a difference in terms of somebody else's well-being, when that's noticed, I think that's really important as well, isn't it? Just recognizing, you know, what it is about that person that makes them unique and different. I
mean, and most of the people we work with, we know if someone's particularly into their nails or their hair or their clothes. Chris is just making the comment that some people say that they're listening, but they're not really hearing what you're saying. And I think you have to really actively show you're listening, I think, and particularly in this world we're in now around virtual things, so we've got to sort of plus our listening skills.
Absolutely. And I think if we can, you know, really listen to people who are living and visiting and supporting people in care settings, and ask them what they think really works and what really matters, but also what they, you know, how would they know they were being listened to before the point in which maybe they weren't able to express, or they're unable to give their answer. And I think that's really important as well. And I think that's an important point that Chris has made. How do we really know we're listened to? How do we really know that, you know, we're visible?
Yeah, I think it's one of the reasons why at Meaningful Care Matters, the work that we do in butterfly homes encourages staff to sit down, because if you're standing above someone, you're not optimizing your ability to connect at an equal level. So it's why we're very passionate about sofas, and we're really sad that some of them are being got rid of in the current situation, because those connections that we have when we are sitting close to someone makes it feel like we are connected. Whereas if staff are constantly standing above, it can add to that sense of not really being in it, that they're in transit in a way, or moving through.
Just thinking about tips for starting conversations, because we're talking about conversations really important. Really make sure that there's lots of conversation, there's lots of chat, but actually sometimes starting that chat, starting a conversation can be difficult to do, can't it? You can run out of things to say. Have you got any pointers really?
Yeah, I'm just thinking of a particular example here where I did some training a few years ago where there was an 18-year-old care worker on the training course, and she was a bit hungover because she'd had her party recently. And she said to me, I don't really know what to talk about because I'm 18 and, you know, they're 90, and I don't really sort of feel like that they'd be very interested. I haven't got much in common. So I stopped the training session and said, let's go out now and give it a try. And I went and sat at a table with this young worker. I'll call her Helen. And she sat at the table, and I said, do you know everyone? There were about 4 people around the table. Helen's just had her 18th birthday party. And I wonder what all of you did for your 18th birthday party. And we had the most amazing half-an-hour conversation about what we did at 18. And then, you know, the 18-year-old Helen mentioned that she had a hangover, and everyone said, oh, do you remember your first time when you had too much to drink? So I think sometimes people don't think that they're interesting. So this young care worker didn't see herself as having anything interesting to say or having anything in common. And yet, actually, we all have something. We've all been 18, unless we're younger than that. So she, at the end of it, she said, I get it now, that I had a conversation there that was perfect, but I didn't think of it.
Yeah. I think sometimes people can get very caught up in asking questions, can't they? And that can be tricky, can't it? You know, how do you stand on asking questions?
Yeah, I mean, there was some trains of thought that are very anti-using questions in dementia care, but I think you can't avoid them totally. I think the thing for me is don't ask the short-term memory question. So the what do you want, what did you have for breakfast question is my sort of worst one, really. Or what have you just had for lunch? My mum's husband's currently in a home, and you know, it's just remembering not to ask the things which require him to remember recent facts. But if you say, tell me about your time when you were in a bank manager in Hampstead, off he goes. So it's finding, again, life story is so key there, isn't it? That the questions that tap into people's longer term memories, all the things that aren't putting them on the spot. So if you said to someone, how many children do you have? Can you imagine if you didn't know the answer to that?
Exactly.
It's such an innocent question, isn't it? Saying, how many children? And yet, how would I feel if suddenly I couldn't do that? So I think we need to be careful with questions that demand us to have to recall things, don't we?
I agree with you, and I think sometimes, you know, when we think about conversation, we think about filling gaps, and often filling the gaps in the silences means, oh, I better ask a question. You know, that shows interest. I'm interested if I'm asking questions. So I think sometimes it's well-meaning. It's just the type of questions, and whether they are very much based on short-term memory if people are struggling with their memory. Good point.
And I think sometimes people forget, and this is something I do in the teaching with Butterfly Home colleagues, is that starting a conversation with a statement rather than the question can be really good. So I could say, I've just got a new dog. She's just arrived, you know, 8 weeks ago, and I'm finding my way because I haven't been a dog owner since I was, you know, very young. And then, I wonder if anyone here has had a dog. You've asked a question. Set the scene first.
Absolutely. And you know, sometimes I think we might feel the need to start a conversation if we notice that somebody's sad, or if they're showing signs of distress as well. You know, how do we how do we respond to that quickly without asking questions? And I wonder whether that's something that, you know, comes up a lot, doesn't it, in training, about, you know, how do we distract or divert someone's attention when actually, you know, often it's just about being with them. Have you got any thoughts on responding to sadness or distress with conversation?
Yeah, I think sometimes for me it's that age-old thing of just acknowledging the feeling, really, which, you know, the posh textbooks call validation, but to me is just staying with it for a moment, and saying, you know, if someone says I want to die or I've had enough, you know, it's an instinct in us to panic a bit and want to put it all right, but just to say, God, that sounds really tough.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's not easy getting older, is it? Or I'm so sorry you're feeling like that. Those are things I get us to practice a lot in training, because I'm not sure, again, British culture, I'm not sure is entirely good at that sort of very emotion-based feeling. We are a bit more kind of, you know, the stereotype, I hope that's not true now, but the stereotype is we want to suppress feelings. But equally, we do want to sort of perhaps lift people a bit as well, but not to go there straight away.
Yeah. So do you think there's some times when actually conversation isn't the answer?
Yeah. And that's actually been my big learning, and my friends who are online in the background will know that my learning is sometimes to be quieter, because I'm too fast, I'm too busy with my own thing, my desire to sort of, you know, so I think actually, and activity coordinators generally, we are recruited, aren't we, those of us who've done that role, to be sort of busy and active and bubbly people, the entertainers. So we've got to learn to be less entertainers sometimes and more quiet facilitators.
There's a question that's just come up in the chat, which I think is really interesting, and it's from Helen, and I think the point really is around how do we make sure in these current times, with extra infection control, social distancing, you know, within these new rules, how do we make sure that we still prioritise connection? You know, how can we make sure we still continue to get this right? Any thoughts on that? That's from Helen.
Well, it's never been more important, really, Helen, has it? Particularly those of us who are having to wear masks, we've got to work really hard at our eye talk, our hands, you know, to sort of use our body language to convey trust. It's a really, really vital time, because actually people are, I would say some people are actually deprived and starved of this kind of connection. Some of the homes that we've been working with in Canada in particular, where there have been quite high COVID rates, have been in their rooms for 2 months, you know, without getting out of their rooms at all. It's really scary times that people are being kept physically safe, but they're kind of emotionally and psychologically not safe.
Yeah. Actually, Chris, I hope it's okay to read out as it's in the chat, but Chris has shared that she's living with dementia and that recently was in hospital, and that her experience was that she felt like she was a prisoner, that nobody spoke to her or listened to her. You know, how do we get this right in hospitals, you know, where we're talking, you know, the focus is often on care homes, isn't it? But actually in hospitals where people are potentially quite unwell, and the focus may well be on getting them physically fit to go home, but actually how do we make sure that even in those really sort of acute situations that time spent and connections are enabled there too? That's tough, isn't it? It's difficult.
I think again, the big one for me around hospitals, similar to care homes, is sometimes a nurse or a healthcare worker just taking time to sit, even if they can't be that close with social distancing. Maybe, Chris, that would have helped you to just at least go, oh, Chris, I'm so sorry that this is just such a difficult time to actually to reassure you that we're here for you, but please know that we are, and you know that it's just that those sort of kind comments that sometimes we forget to say. And I think perhaps we with the whole sort of COVID thing, with our being busy as a sort of way of coping in a way, and it's
absolutely
giving ourselves permission to just slow down and go, actually the most important thing, Chris is in this bed probably feeling a bit disorientated and probably not very well. Chris, I don't know what was wrong, you know, how can I just, you know, is it the most important thing that I go and write up my notes at this moment? No, it's actually that I stay with and stop and be with someone.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's a permission thing again, Hill. You're right, that many nurses in hospitals likewise don't feel they're being seen to work unless they are, they've got medicine in their hand, or
and they are incredibly busy. I think it's fair to say that is they are incredibly busy. So,
and probably short staffed.
Yeah. In terms of kind of the place, so thinking about particular locations, where and when do you think the best conversations happen?
Well, you and I have talked in the past, Hill, that our best conversations with our teenagers are often in the car. Well, I've certainly said that, because I think there's something about sitting beside someone, and in America, I don't know whether our Wisconsin friend is there, but in the States, there's the concept of being on the porch, which Lois Weaver talks about, but that sitting beside someone on the porch and reflecting on what you can see out the window or in the background, that it's slightly less threatening than if you're kind of full on looking at someone. So I think sometimes walking with someone can generate lovely conversations. I had a friend, I don't know whether Danuta's had this experience, who's been a therapist, who again can give more helpful therapy, again walking with a person with dementia, because it almost helps your brain to move, because you're moving.
And I think sometimes where perhaps there is if somebody's living with dementia and their communication is impaired, there may be, again, there's a lot of pressure put on, let's sit and have a conversation, whereas if you're looking at things and walking about, it just takes that pressure off a little bit, maybe.
Colleen's just agreed with me on the porch visits. I think we need to introduce porches to more care homes.
It's a lovely idea.
I come from Kenya, and so we call them verandas there. So African verandas and Canadian and American porches, I think we need to bring them into more British care homes.
I suppose it is what would have been kind of over the fence chat. I remember my gran talking about, the conversations that she'd have with her neighbour over the fence. That sort of, thinking about, it's kind of in passing, it's informal, it's you're on your way somewhere, but it's also really important just to take a few minutes just to see how someone is and how their day's going, that kind of thing.
I mean, you mentioned, I think Jana mentioned also a conversation with someone in the bath.
Yes.
That when personal care is happening, that it's very intimate, it's quite a private time. Those, certainly when I used to work in evenings in care homes, I love the night time, because somehow the conversations felt somehow more intimate and
more intimate, definitely. Sorry, go on.
I remember watching a sun going down with one gentleman. We turned his wheelchair to watch the sun going down. And again, just such a simple thing to sort of watch the sunset. And we didn't talk at all for about 10 minutes. We just watched the changing sky. And it was the most amazing conversation, but totally silent.
That kind of brings me on really to think about people perhaps who, are unable to have a conversation that is easy for us to interpret in terms of their language, and any thoughts about how we can approach conversation where conversation is limited, really. Any thoughts on who you might introduce that might support you with that?
I mean, I've talked in the past about this, but I use puppets quite a lot, particularly with people with quite advanced dementia. I've got a little friend here. I don't know whether anyone can see him. This is Naughty Puppet. He can be a little cheeky, so we have to make sure that he's going to behave himself. Are you going to behave yourself? Yes, okay. And what I found with puppets is, hi guys, hi, is that people will sometimes share with a puppet what they wouldn't share with me. There's a sort of confidant sort of aspect to a puppet. I mean, obviously you need to be mindful of the child, the child's appropriate stuff. Some people would think it was silly, but I've been surprised how many people either get very playful with a puppet or really want to sort of share something, particularly if they want to complain about something about the home. Naughty Puppet will say, what do you think of the food here? And they'll go, it's rubbish. But if I ask them, they might say, oh, it's very nice, thank you.
So, I think that's a good point as well. And I think what I really like about the idea of, giving people an opportunity to have a grumble and have a moan, and for that not to be seen as negative, that actually that's part of well-being too. I've certainly know quite a few people who actually love to have a good moan and a good complain, and that often lifts their spirits. Of course, there's a point at which we might start to think this person's really moaning or grumbling a lot.
Yeah.
But yes, I was just taken with your lovely example about your stepdad recently. Would you like
Yeah.
to share
Yeah,
that?
so my stepfather's gone into a care home during COVID, and it has been heartbreaking. Chris, I noticed you mentioning somebody who's heartbroken for my mum who can't see him. And when we did visit for the first time, he was sitting quite at a distance, and we were in a sort of pergola in the garden. And he obviously thought, why are we in the pretty pergola? And he's sort of dumped in a wheelchair, sort of rather at a distance.
Right.
And anyway, in his brain, he was clearly in some kind of hotel, and he said, this is undoubtedly the worst bar in France. This is a care home in the south of England. So, it says a lot, doesn't it? But that what would have helped him actually to relax, and I did try to say this to care workers, bring him a glass. He's a man who likes his wine.
Yes.
Yeah. But no, we can't have any drinks in the garden. They didn't mean badly, the staff, but they didn't understand that actually in order for him to relax with us, that glass of wine would have really helped, because for the whole of the half an hour that my mum was trying to connect with him, he was preoccupied by this damned French bar.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's an example of confusion in dementia, that sometimes we really need to inhabit that reality and understand what he was trying to express.
Yeah, but also that actually he was giving you his opinion as well. Back to what we were saying about expressing himself, giving his opinion, and if only he could have had an opportunity to have a decent glass of red wine. But
it's little things to get right sometimes, isn't it?
Definitely.
And I think actually it links with helping relatives with things to when you are visiting. So my stepsister took along some Gilbert and Sullivan songs when she was visiting, and some poetry that he liked, and that really helped kind of get him relaxed by singing a Gilbert and Sullivan song, or playing it on the phone, or sort of reading some poetry that he liked. So relatives need some help with that sometimes, don't they? Because it's and back to where to start in the conversation.
Absolutely. And I think if you're finding out, bits of information, gems, I don't know if you've got any examples of where you've had an unexpected conversation with somebody where something's come up and you thought, my goodness, that really is something we didn't know about this person. Then what do you do with that information? That gets sort of passed back so that someone else can form that connection and have a positive communication. I don't know if there's anything comes to mind about, finding out something you weren't expecting about somebody.
Yes, I had a lovely story once with a woman who was, again, very non-verbal and not quite advanced in her dementia, and she wasn't able to cope with group situations. So sort of slightly as a sort of just to try something different, I took her to a local restaurant. I knew from her life story, I knew she'd been a woman who used to eat out a lot. So we went to a restaurant. It was slightly nerve-wracking because I thought, I've no idea how she's going to cope in a restaurant. And it happened to be an Italian restaurant, and this Italian waiter appeared, and she just suddenly burst into fluent Italian with this man. I think the combination of the handsome man and the Italian, she emerged, she'd lived in Tuscany, and I just thought, my goodness, I had no idea, A, that she spoke fluent Italian, B, that she was more comfortable in Italian than English now. It was just a beautiful example of how knowing that made such a difference, and I think then making sure that was known by other people, because it was a real window to communication with her.
That's lovely. And I think it is, isn't it? You never know what you're going to find out about somebody when you just sit and spend time, and if you're prepared to give that little bit of yourself as well. Can you say a little bit about, I think sometimes staff aren't really sure how much they should share about themselves in conversation. We're very focused, aren't we, about we want to be person-centered, but we should also be professional. How do we help each other? I think we've had conversations about this over the years, but also the staff that we support, to kind of get that right, because that can be tricky, can't it, Sal?
Yeah, I think the way that we always explore it in the training that we do at Meaningful Care Matters is to sort of say that we're not about obviously sort of unburdening ourselves and telling all our deepest, darkest secrets to people. But we are drawing on ourselves, and we are giving emotionally. In order, particularly to do good dementia care work, you have to be real, to be yourself. And it's little things like, we have activity aprons, which some people keep them on their person, but with sort of photographs in your apron. So I've got a photograph of my little cat Jerry there, and a photograph of my daughter when she was much younger. I think, you know, little things like that can create a rapport that shows that you share. I mean, obviously staff need to share with things that they feel comfortable with sharing, but if you've just been to, I don't know, a wedding, it might be bring in the outfit that you wore at the wedding. I did that once and got lots of opinions about whether I should wear hats or not hats. But you know, trying on the
what was the outcome, Sal?
Yeah, I think it's a general feeling that I should avoid that particular hat. But what was interesting about that example is I did it before the wedding, and then when I came back the following week, there were several people who had dementia who said, "What did you wear?" They remembered the wedding because it had been a significant conversation. So I think we do need to free teams up to get away from that thing about, oh, I must be distant, I mustn't share. But obviously to know the boundaries of that as well. And there is a line, but
and I think, you know, if staff are having the necessary conversations with their peers, with their colleagues, with their manager as well, in terms of, you know, being able to share with themselves when they're at work, that can be helpful too, can't it? It can help them manage those boundaries, that the connections and conversations with their managers and with their colleagues are very important in that regard, in terms of their well-being.
But I think thinking about team members, how they bring themselves to work, you know, it can be something like I know you can't always wear jewelry with personal care, but you know, an item of jewelry or your glasses say something about who you are, you know, so you can share yourself in different ways. And I think at Meaningful Care Matters, as you know, we don't encourage uniforms because we think everyone looks the same, but there are other ways to show, even if you are in a place with uniforms, to show your individuality.
Of course,
and start conversations around, you know, the way you have your hair or whatever.
I'm just looking to see if we have any questions on the chat. Did you?
There was a quite difficult question, one around, which might be another webinar, I suspect. Certainly one that we have interest in at Meaningful Care Matters, but around wanting to support a couple to still have a sexual relationship or an intimate relationship, which obviously is a part of connection. And the questioner was asking, have other people experienced that, to sort of maintain intimacy between a spouse and the person living in the home in this context? I mean, my short answer to that would be that yes, we should 100%, as you've said in your question, find ways to enable people to still enjoy that part of their relationship, and to watch for the sort of the barriers that create that. But it can be a bit fraught, can't it, when particularly when consent issues are complex.
Absolutely, and where, you know, the opinions of many become part of the discussion as well, and we have to keep really focused, don't we, on who needs to know, who needs to be involved, other than the people perhaps that should be involved. I think that can sometimes where things get can be overcomplicated, can't they? But
and sometimes other family members can have opinions. It is amazing how it brings everything out in the wash, doesn't it?
So in terms of looking back over the kind of last few months and thinking about where we are now in terms of supporting families to stay connected, what do you think we've kind of learnt about all of that, Sally, particularly during the crisis? Any thoughts on, you know, enabling connection between families? I know that Skype has been used a lot, you know, so conference calling. Is that always the right way to go? Any thoughts on those enabling?
I think it's the key message really is that it's not a one size fits all, isn't it? And unfortunately, particularly with obviously the nature of government regulations, is there's some very blanket statements which actually don't fit individual circumstances. And in the case of my stepdad, Skype was actually quite distressing, and I've heard other people say the same, that he was kind of looking at the care worker who was holding the iPad. He couldn't really connect with the screen, not helped by the fact Mum was sometimes like quite close. But actually the telephones work really well for him because he can hear her very easily, and it kind of, because of his cognitive impairment, it seems to. But then there are other people with dementia who'd find a phone impossible. I don't know whether, you know, Chris has views on that, but so it's got to be individual. I think one of the very sad things, and we talked about this, Hill, in the past, is I do think have been situations where the family member should have been treated like an essential worker, given that they are essential to that person's well-being, identity, and particularly near the end of their lives or with a cognitive impairment. It's like losing your best friend. So I do think there's going to be quite a lot of unpicking to do on this, because certainly on social media, I'm seeing some very distressing stories of people who are literally heartbroken.
Yeah, I would say the same at NAPA. And, you know, how do we make sure that any guidance that we're putting out is current? You know, it reflects the current kind of guidance from the government, but also, you know, meets the needs of the people that actually need to stay connected, and that over the period of time in which people haven't seen each other, that people's needs may have changed, and that might be the needs of the person perhaps receiving care, but also the person, family members too. And how do we make sure that, you know, everybody gets what they need, really?
Yeah.
And it has to be, as you say.
I mean, it's going to be such a complex. There was a social media message today of someone whose mother-in-law had died during, you know, a few weeks ago, and they hadn't seen her for 3 months. You know, that really is going to exacerbate the grief and the guilt, and so it's a very, very difficult thing to navigate. But you know, but we need to keep emotional well-being at the heart of all this, because as my mum says, you know, it's all very well being alive, but if you're dying inside.
Yeah, absolutely. And so if you were to give us kind of a couple of sort of parting comments about conversation and connection, one of the things that I'd like to ask you about is, well, what is the risk if we don't prioritize it? What happens to us if we don't prioritize connection?
I think some people do shut down, and you see that quite a lot. It's like a stress reaction, the fight or flight, really, that there are many people who, because they haven't been noticed or given that kind of connection, essentially close down. And it just breaks my heart, really. And it's sometimes because we haven't learned the language, which is a language more around emotions. I remember one woman, when I was walking down a hallway with her, it's again that walking together, and I looked out at the sky and I said, oh, it's a beautiful blue, and the sky, and it was a day like today, and she looked at me and she said, but it hasn't a hood. And I thought, oh, that's making some sense. And anyone know that poem? It's an A.A. Milne poem, sort of hush hush, whisper who dares. Christopher Robin is saying his prayers. See Nanny's dressing gown on the door, it's a beautiful blue, but it hasn't a hood. And I thought, I remember that poem, but it would have been so easy to have thought, oh, woman with dementia, not making any sense. But what happened there was I had the cultural references, if you like, to know the reference, and then we recited the whole thing together, and she just came to life.
Lovely. Yeah.
But what it made me think was, how often have I missed those references?
Yes.
And just switched off and thought, oh, she's not making any. So I suppose that would be one of my key messages to everyone, is never see anything as rubbish, because everything that people say has got meaning and significance to them, and it's up to us to try and show that we care, even if we can't quite unravel the actual meaning.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just aware that there's a couple of comments that have come in about wearing masks particularly, and I just wonder, kind of, you know, just in terms of your experience of how are you supporting the staff that you work with to communicate well when, you know, some or all of their faces covered. You know, somebody's saying, you know, the guidance is telling us person-centered visits, but you must all wear masks at all times. You know, how do we get the balance right? How do we communicate?
Well, some of our butterfly homes have decided that when the relative first arrives, that they are standing from a distance without a mask. So at least in the first few moments, the person sees the full face. So I think, again, we've got to sort of work hard at looking at each individual situation, because sometimes people might find standing from a distance better if you can at least see the whole person, but whereas for other people it might be better to be a bit closer but with the mask. But I don't think it should be a blanket wear the mask, particularly, well, certainly if you're in the garden. I think when we visited, we didn't wear masks because we were in a garden and at a distance, and that really helps the recognition.
I know that some of our members at NAPA have been wearing photographs of them, you know, a photograph of today, and on a Polaroid, you know, camera, isn't it, that comes out straight away. Print it off so it looks like the person on that day, and wearing that on them as well.
And then some people saying I'm smiling under the mask, you know, little.
Exactly. And just acknowledging that it's.
I mean, I don't know why we haven't developed more masks, a bit like the those for the hearing impaired, which are see-through. I think it's because they fug up more, maybe, and they're more expensive to make. But you can get a bit like a visor, but they are a see-through mask. I hope that if we carry on using masks, we're going to look at ways of at least the face being shown, because the mouth is the way that shows whether I'm in a good mood or a bad mood. You know, I know my eyes are talking too, but it's very difficult to convey reassurance without your mouth, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely, yes it is. Look, I'm really aware of the time, Sally, and probably ready for another cup of tea, but I just
I'm making them do that. Other hot tip of the day, don't forget to have mugs that are interesting. Which one have you got? I've got one with a duck. Can everyone see it?
I've got my 70s vintage set, which I love.
Nice.
I love, yeah.
So I think that would be one of my messages for tea parties, is making it you know, get rid of the beige beakers, get rid of the sort of standard white sets. You know, actually people's individual football teams or hockey teams in the case of Canada or whatever, favorite grandma, cats, dogs, whatever, you know, having something on a mug is a great conversation starter, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think reminder for me is that, you know, just having a cup of tea, having a cup of coffee, having that glass of decent red wine, whatever it might be, that in its way is often a route into that conversation and that connection, isn't it? And, you know, I heard that really well. And I think the other thing that you said about silence, I think conversation, you know, one of the best conversations I've ever had, you said, was watching a sunset where we didn't say a word, and I thought that was lovely. That's actually made me feel quite emotional. So thank you for that. So
there's a few questions coming in around time restraints, Hill. I think the key message we need to get across to the whole team, and particularly people who are ancillary staff like maintenance and gardening and housekeeping and chefs, is it doesn't actually take long to talk in meaningful care matters about changing the moment. You know, in the same way that the butterfly on the flower stops for a moment and it lifts you, that if you, as you walk through a room to go from one place to another, rather than just walking through a room, smile or wave or pay someone a compliment, how many seconds has that taken? And yet so often, I always say, when we're talking about trying to create homes, how many people in their own homes have a random stranger walking through their living room? And yet that happens all the time, doesn't it, in care services? So one of my messages is never walk through a room without making some connection with someone.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you say there was another question, Sal? I might have missed it on the chat.
Well, it was about time, I think. It's that it can make it difficult to relax in the natural communication when you feel you should be getting on.
And how stress can make you kind of have an impact on your patients, and then on your patients, not your patients, and how that might actually come across in your behaviour and your communication as well. I mean, I think that's difficult, isn't it?
Well, you mentioned when we were talking earlier, Hill, that actually connection for the team is important too. So if you're not getting it yourself, how can you give it to others? So there's the big piece for me around the emotional resilience of the team is if you're really stressed, how can you give? So what are we doing as managers, as activity coordinators, as trainers, whoever we are, to actually give the staff a sense that they're listened to and valued? Because actually it's not just talking about them, is it? It's about all of us.
No, that's a really good point. We've got the chat. If there are questions we haven't answered, hopefully we can look through those and let people know our thoughts. But I just want to say thank you, Sally, for
love talking to you, Hill,
with me this afternoon, and with everybody else. Thank you to everybody that's here. And just really to, you know, in terms of, you know, staying connected with each other, and also just getting what you need in terms of, you know, doing this work, which can be, you know, stressful, for all of us. The Napa helpline, as from last week, now has a free phone number. So, you know, just a little plug about the helpline. We're here for you to talk to 5 days a week. We've been very pleased to receive some funding from the RAIN Foundation, which has enabled us to extend that and to make the helpline free. So the phone number is 0800 1585503. So please call us on the helpline and keep in touch. And thank you so much, Sally. Happy teachers.
Yeah, and anyone who wants to know more about our work, obviously Meaningful Care Matters details will be at the end.
Absolutely.
Particularly the people who are talking about the issues around sexual intimacy, etc. It's a topic, it's a big topic, and Danuta, who's online, has written a great book on it.
Topic.
Do her
Yeah,
plug.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.
Have a nice afternoon. I hope it gets cooler.
Bye for now.